Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. Yesterday, of course, was our election day, and we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. Jonathan Saenz will be with us in just a few minutes, and we'll go through some of the statewide races. And so we'll spend most of our time just kind of looking back at this primary and also looking ahead to the general election. A couple of other issues I want to put on the table, one of which is that the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, today issued a very stern warning to California, in which he announced a lawsuit that has been filed by the Justice Department over the state's immigration policies. He said in one of his speeches today to the California peace officers, "I understand that we have a wide variety of political opinions out there on immigration, but the law is in the books and its purposes are clear and just. There's no nullification, no succession. Federal law is the supreme law of the land. I would invite any doubters go to Gettysburg, to the tombs of John C. Calhoun and Abraham Lincoln. This matter has been settled." Whoa, quite a line. And a little bit later, I'm going to get into some of the reasons why this surfaced. The first, of course, is that not only do you have certain cities that are called sanctuary cities, you now have California as a sanctuary state. And in the next couple of hours, when we're doing the national broadcast, maybe we'll come back to some of that. But also there's another reason, which, again, if you live in the state of Texas, maybe you've not heard about, and that is the Oakland mayor actually decided to alert all sorts of immigrants in that area, in the San Francisco Bay Area, that there were going to be ICE raids. And so hundreds that would have been collected were not. Now, the ones they did collect, a high percentage of those, and I'll give you some of the numbers a little bit later, actually had felonies or substantial misdemeanors. And the example I use in a commentary that will come out next week is, well, what would you think if, let's take the word immigration out of it, or immigrants out of it, if you knew that the mayor of a city would alert individuals that had committed a felony, maybe they're criminals of some sort, and alerted them ahead of time that there were going to be agents, in this case law enforcement agents, that would be coming to their house or their apartment? Well, I think you'd be appalled, because you'd say, these are people that have already demonstrated that they're dangerous. They have already committed a felony. They may actually only be out on bond, and we are concerned about what they might be doing again, or they've been charged with a felony and skipped their bond, and as a result have created the situation that we have seen unfolding so many times in our cities today. So those are a couple of issues that we may get into a little bit later, but that's kind of one of the big issues in the news. But let's, if we can, kind of look over what happened last night. The U.S. Senate race will be one that I think we're going to hear more and more about. It has to do with the fact that Ted Cruz won easily, got 85% of the vote, and Beto O'Rourke got 61%, so there's no need for a runoff. And already Ted Cruz has produced, it's kind of a variation on a country western song about liberals can't run in Texas, so we'll leave that for another day. But nevertheless, that will be one where there will be enormous amount of money spent. And interestingly enough, there was a piece by Neil Stevens that said from a year now, I should say for a year now, Ted Cruz has been ringing the bell, warning about the coming Democratic wave in Texas. One key fact last night confirmed his fears. He says Ted Cruz won big last night. His primary election success was convincing, as was the Republican vote advantage over the Democrats, led by Senate primary winner Robert Beto O'Rourke. But Ted Cruz isn't worried about himself. He'll win. What Ted Cruz is worried about is the U.S. House of Representatives, because he said back in October that Republicans were facing a potential bloodbath, and the primary results last night still show that it's possible. In the 2012 primary first round, David Dewhurst and Ted Cruz and the rest of Republicans combined for 1.4 million votes in the hotly contested open seat primary. However, Democrats only managed about 500,000. But last night, what you have is Ted Cruz himself got 1.3 million votes out of a combined 1.5 for Republicans. But the turnout for the Democrats was 1 million. So that's essentially double what it was back when you had that open primary. So the possibility that there might be more of a turnout for Democrats is something that we'll kind of keep on the front burner and talk about from time to time. When we look at some of the House districts, Sam Johnson is stepping down and Van Taylor won the Republican primary. There will be a runoff between Lori Birch and Sam Johnson. No, that's a different Sam Johnson, and that's one of the concerns I had. If this man, who also goes by Sam Johnson, were on the ballot, a lot of people who aren't necessarily in the news cycle would say, oh, Sam Johnson, yeah, he's our incumbent. I'll vote for him, even though he was a Democrat. So this is going to be a runoff. In some respects, I think Van Taylor would hope that Lori Birch wins over Sam Johnson, because don't you know that Van Taylor would have to spend a lot of money and a lot of time trying to convince the voters in the 3rd Congressional District that the Sam Johnson running against him is not the Sam Johnson that has been serving all those years. So that's just one of those interesting ones. And Jeb Hensarling's district, that's District 5. You have a runoff there between Bunny Pounds and Lance Gooden, so we'll see where that one goes. And then also one other congressional district. No surprise, Pete Sessions won again in the Republican primary, but you will have a runoff between Colin Allred and Lillian Salerno. So you've got some interesting races at the national level, both for the Senate and for the House of Representatives. Just before we take a break, let's get into a couple of the statewide races. In the governor's race, against no surprise, of course, that Greg Abbott won more than 90% of the vote. But there will be a runoff between Lupe Valdez and Andrew White. Lupe Valdez has been the sheriff, Dallas County. Andrew White, the son of Mark White, who served as a governor at one time. So we'll see where that one comes out. Again, pretty straightforward. Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick will be running against Mike Collier. In Land Commissioner, some of the same things. You will have Miguel Suarzo running against George P. Bush. He was able to fend off the challenge by Jerry Patterson, and Sid Miller was able to get reelected as well. So in many cases, as we have said on this program so many times before, the power of incumbency. There were a few incumbents that actually lost, and in a minute we'll talk about some of those. But in a case that almost all of us in the Dallas area, Dallas-Fort Worth area know, if you probably saw one ad, you saw hundreds of ads for Angela Paxton and Philip Huffine. So in case you did not hear, in Senate District 8, Angela Paxton got 54% of the vote. Philip Huffine's got 45% of the vote. But it's interesting as the split. If you look at just Collin County, that would be Plano and McKinney and Allen, things like that. Paxton won 55% to 44%. But if you look at Dallas County, because this Senate district goes somewhat into Dallas County, actually Huffine's won 54% to 45%. After all, he was at one time the chairman of the Republican Party in Dallas County. So if nothing else, as all of us around the table have said, and even on the other side of the glass have said, we're glad this is over because we are so tired, and I know you're tired, of all of these negative ads. But when we come back, we're going to talk with Jonathan Saenz and look at kind of where we're going with all of this in terms of the election, what that might mean for legislation before the Texas legislature, and perhaps if you have a particular comment or candidate that you want to know more about, we'll have a chance to chat with him and with you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll come back and spend some time talking about the election last night and what it means for the state of Texas. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, Ryan Anderson responds to our transgender moment in his new book, When Harry Became Sally. He begins his discussion by comparing two movies. The classic film, When Harry Met Sally, explored the question of whether a man and a woman can really be just friends. More recently, the film The Danish Girl asked a different question. Can a man really become a woman? The film was based on the true story of the first known subject of sex reassignment surgery. America is in the midst of what has become the transgender moment. When he was on my radio program, we talked about how fast this all took place. Most Americans had never heard of transgender identity, but within a year it became the latest civil rights cause. He said that the book in many ways provides support for the actions by Dr. Paul McHugh. He is a professor of psychiatry at Johns Hopkins Medical School who raised important questions about the effectiveness of hormonal treatments and sex reassignment surgery. This 250-page book with 30 pages of endnotes attempts to provide a comprehensive look at the transgender movement and policies that have been proposed to address the demands of transgender activists. We also talked about how transgender concepts are being taught in the schools. There's the genderbread person that is supposed to help children sort through how their gender identity and gender expression relates to their biological sex. And there's the gender unicorn that is supposed to help them understand who they may be physically attracted to and emotionally attracted to. He also documents how some young people exhibit gender dysphoria but later become more comfortable with their sexuality. Transgender activists have so misrepresented this book that I wonder if they even read the same book I read. That is one more reason why I recommend that you get the book and read it for yourself. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment, I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG in theaters March 16th. More information at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Election day yesterday, and we're kind of giving you a chance to look at the impact that this might have in the general election and, most importantly, on the Texas legislature and, of course, in Congress. Jonathan Saenz with us. He is the president of Texas Values. Before he was the head of that, he was with, of course, Liberty Institute, which split off, and actually headed up the Liberty Institute offices at the Texas Capitol there in Austin. He really has been speaking out on all sorts of issues ranging from religious liberty and the sanctity of human life, family values, constitutional values. A graduate of the University of Texas at Austin with a law degree from the University of Houston Law Center. And Jonathan, always great to have you on the program with us.
Hey, thanks for inviting me on. It's a pleasure.
We spent a little bit of time just giving a few of the numbers here. One of the things that I enjoy about the new format is the next 2 hours we will be on a national broadcast, but this hour we're actually just in Dallas, and so that allows me to really kind of focus on Dallas and Texas and talk about some of the implications. But certainly we see that there is a battle that is going to be significant at the national level, and that is Ted Cruz is going to be running against Beto O'Rourke. And one of the things that people have been pointing out is that even though Ted Cruz last night got 1.3 million votes, the Democrats did get 1 million votes, and that's up significantly from the last time we had one of these midterm elections a number of years ago. So there are all sorts of things, and I know you've been hearing it as well, that there's an attempt by the Democratic Party to turn Texas blue. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, it's really just in a lot of ways become a fundraising strategy for them because there's been no results. I mean, Democrats have not won a statewide election in Texas since before or around 1994. So their track record is dismal at best. And so, but you got to take these things into consideration. I mean, you can't overlook these things. And you look at the money that was raised by O'Rourke and some of the numbers that he got. It is interesting that Ted Cruz so significantly and resoundingly won his primary election, even though he did have a person or two that was also on the ballot. Whereas O'Rourke, I mean, looked like he wasn't all that convincing in his win in his own primary. So there were two other people in that race that got a significant percentage. I think O'Rourke only got about 60%. And so, whereas Ted Cruz, I don't remember what his percentage was, close to 90%.
Yeah, 85, more than 85%. That's correct.
Yeah, more than 85%. So it looks like the Democrats have a lot of work to do as far as gearing up now for a statewide battle in, going Democrat versus Republican. And so I think they have a lot of work to do to get their own house in order. And there were some significant House races, too, that pertain to the Dallas area, too, I'd love to touch on.
Yeah, we certainly can do that. And before we go any further, though, what you said, I think, is helpful because, Jonathan, one of the things I'm trying to do more and more is help our listeners develop a level of discernment. And there was a good piece written just the other day by somebody saying, if you travel down to the state of Texas and you follow this particular candidate, Beto O'Rourke, and then you come back and you have to write your piece, say you're in New York City, or which is where a lot of these people are writing. You can't come back and say, well, nice guy, but no chance he's going to win Ted Cruz, because that's not what your editor sent you down there for. So there is a sense in which you do have to take some of these articles and even some of these fundraising appeals with a grain of salt, maybe a whole bag of salt. So I think you've said something, I think, rather significant about that as well. But let's get into a couple of those. I'll use the Texas House in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, but you can pick up a few in Houston and Austin and other places. But one that people have been watching, of course, is Van Taylor taking over the district for Sam Johnson. That's District 3. Now, there's going to be a runoff between Lori Birch and Sam Johnson. No, that's a different Sam Johnson. And the first question I have, Jonathan, is I don't think this Democrat by the name of Sam Johnson is going to win. But if he does, don't you know that one of the things that Van Taylor would have to do throughout the campaign is educate the voters so that when they look down the ballot and see the name Sam Johnson, they don't think it's the Sam Johnson that's been serving in Congress all those years.
Yeah, you'll see these strategies sometimes where someone with a related or name that seems well known will get on the ballot and people are taken by surprise or sometimes led astray, and that can impact things. And so you do have to be mindful of that.
Well, and so again, and matter of fact, we have a few of those in Texas history, but we'll move on. District 5, you have a runoff between Bunny Pounds and Lance Gooden, so that's certainly one to watch as well. And then in District 32, that's where I think Democrats think they have the greatest chance of winning. Pete Sessions last night got 73% of the Republican vote, but you have Colin Elrod and Lillian Salerno. And the argument for that, Jonathan, is, well, this is a congressional district that Hillary Clinton won. So maybe that's the place, because we've been hearing Ted Cruz warning that, he's going to get reelected. I don't see any way that doesn't happen. But he's concerned that as you go down the ballot, both on some of these congressional races, and then, as we talk about in just a minute, the House and Senate races in the Texas House, that might be the impact. So what are your thoughts about that? You've been watching some of these races. Any other thoughts about some of these congressional races?
Well, look, I mean, Republicans have to take these concerns seriously, and while, I stated statistics about the last time someone statewide ran as Democrats, my point is I just don't think there's a whole lot of strength to what the Democrats have shown so far. But that doesn't mean that they're not going to get to work in the next 4 or 5 months. You better believe that they are. And a big part of that is because of a lot of the funding coming into Texas. People that have Democrat interest from there and other parts of the country, they want to dump a lot of money into Texas to help promote this narrative of turn Texas blue. And so there's a lot of, reason for Republicans to take notice and to take it seriously, because I think, when you win statewide elections like Republicans have for so many years, decades now, and you've got, the U.S. Senator being Republican, the two of them being Republican for so long, some people can also think that they're still going to be okay, that these are just fundraising efforts by Republicans to scare people. They're just trying to take them seriously. And so I do think that Republicans need to take these issues seriously and see that there could be some targeted areas where it's shown a little bit more, where you can try to tip some type of power balance or whatever at the federal level. And so I think Republicans need to be mindful of that. Voters that vote Republican and are looking at which way the election goes. I mean, so much of this is about turnout,
Yes.
and who decides to show up at the ballot. And I think the more that Christians can get engaged and show up at the ballot, it makes a difference. Every vote does matter.
I was at a dinner last night, and some people said, well, they were looking in particular, one we'll talk about in a minute, the state Senate race, Angela Paxson and Philip Huffines. Of course, everybody's aware of that because we have been bombarded, pummeled by negative ads. But people are saying, well, what are the polls saying? I said, well, I can tell you what the polls say, but that means nothing because of turnout. And you know as well as I do, Jonathan, having watched some of these political races over the years, that oftentimes when you especially look at the national level, the party in power in the White House usually loses seats in the off-year election. And that's due to a number of things, but part of that is complacency. And as I've said before, the election of individuals is not just about numbers, it's about intensity. If I've got even a smaller group of intense people that they're going to put up yard signs, they're going to knock on doors, they're going to make phone calls, they could out a poll and win over someone who, quote, had the numbers. So intensity and turnout is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people don't realize, percentage-wise, how low some of the turnouts can be in elections. And so, you look at some of those numbers and you're like, wow, well, look, there's so much talk about it, right? You'll get all these ads and you just think that all these people turned out to vote. And so that's just typically not the case. And so, and it happens one by one, one house in another home, one neighborhood by neighborhood, all of those things get multiplied. And you're right. I mean, the more that you have people that are volunteering that are more, excited about a particular candidate, that can have an impact, And so I do think the fact that you have someone who is widely known as Ted Cruz, who's got tremendous volunteers and this incredible support network. He ran for president, having him, if you will, on the top of the ticket, even though it's not a presidential year, I think in a lot of ways that benefits Republicans because Senator Cruz is very active. He's very energetic. He's got a very loyal following, and it's not going to be just about winning. It is certainly important to win, but there's going to be some motivation to send a statement through whatever his numbers are, and that likely is going to help the other races down the ballot. And so, but you never know what can happen in some of these smaller geographic districts.
That's true.
Where people have moved a lot in just the past couple of years.
Let's take a break, and we've talked a little bit about some of the, if you will, sort of national races. We'll come back, and we'll spend just a minute talking about governor, lieutenant governor, land commissioner, agricultural commissioner. Those are pretty straightforward. But then what does this mean in the Texas House and the Texas Senate, especially in terms of some of the legislation that I know that Jonathan and the people of Texas values, as well as other grassroots organizations, want to try to accomplish in the next legislative year. If you would like to join us, maybe you have some thoughts or some questions, 1-800-351-1212. We'll take your calls and continue our conversation with Jonathan Saenz right after this.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment comes I Can Only Imagine. The untold true story of Mercy Me's Bart Millard and the power of redemption and forgiveness.
My dad was a monster, and I saw God transform him. I didn't think that God could do that.
I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. In theaters March 16th. More information is available at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
When you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living on a different planet from those presenting the headlines? We've always known there was a subtle bias, but today, it's about as subtle as stepping off a 1,000-foot cliff. The only way to counteract that bias is with the truth. To join the Truth Team at Point of View, your support will educate and encourage potentially millions every day. Don't let lies win. Step up so that lives and our nation can be changed. Join the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Jonathan Saenz, and he is the president of Texas Values. We have a link to the website, and you simply can go to txvalues.org, or you don't even have to remember that. Just click on his picture or the information that we have there, and you certainly can follow what is happening in the Texas legislature. He's for many years has, of course, been articulating many of our concerns to those legislators in Austin, also testifying at various committee meetings and a variety of other things. So certainly if you are not already on the mailing list for Texas Values, we've made it very easy. And on their front page there's a place where you can get their updates. Of course, they had a primary voters guide, and I know when the general election comes out, Jonathan, you'll have one for the general election as well, and those are the kinds of resources we really want to put in the hands of all of our listeners. So thank you again for doing that and educating us about these issues.
Well, look, it's important for people to vote informed, and that's always our goal. You know, the freevotersguide.com website where our voters guide is the most trafficked, the most well-used. It gets the most attention online of any voter's guide in the state of Texas. And so, but we're only able to do that while people continue to see value in that resource, and our friends at the national level and other levels that continue to promote it. But, that's when people get more excited, when they feel a little bit more informed, when they know what the issues are, when they have an idea of where candidates stand. That usually compels more people to go vote and participate, and that's what we're all about.
And again, I've known Kelly Shackelford for years, and of course, I've known of you as well. So I've used those voter guides, have promoted it. And also, let me just also promote the fact that you need financial support. So I hope your people will consider that as well. And there's all sorts of ways for you to click on that website. But let's, if we can, talk about the statewide races. I don't want to spend too much time on governor, lieutenant governor, land commissioner, agriculture commissioner, all the way down, because as you pointed out, there has been a sweep on the table by the Republicans, and I think right now you'd have to really think something a little bit out of the ordinary to assume that the two individuals right now in a runoff, which are Lupe Valdez and Andrew White, to assume either of those who eventually wins one of the runout would beat Greg Abbott is just a little bit out of the ordinary, pretty unlikely. As you work your way down to Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, whether you look at Land Commissioner George P. Bush, had a little bit of a challenge by Jerry Patterson, Sid Miller, Agricultural Commissioner. You can pick any one of those races. At least at that level, pretty safe to say you're assuming most Republicans are going to win those races. Fair?
Well, that's the expectation. Once again, we talked about this in the last segment. Republicans can't take anything for granted because there is a well-funded effort to take on Republicans in the November elections. And so, in an off year, voter turnout is lower as far as a non-presidential year, and so people need to be prepared to do their part. Now, I do think one of the statewide races, there's a few notables. When it comes to the lieutenant governor's race, I don't think anyone thought that he was particularly going to lose. Obviously, Dan Patrick is a very strong statewide, our lieutenant governor, but his challenger, Scott Milder, did try to make an issue of Patrick being so strong on the faith and family issues,
right,
being so strong on religious liberty, protecting privacy in our intimate places like showers, bathrooms, and locker rooms, protecting the issue of innocent human life. And so, look, at the end of the day, Dan Patrick won by almost 76%. Not only that, but every candidate that he endorsed in the Senate races won re-election or beat or were in the challenger position and prevailed. That's Donna Campbell, Pat Fallon, Bob Hall, who had a very contentious and contested race, Joan Huffman, and so and I'm leaving one out. But
Angela Paxton, one of those, yeah.
Yeah, Angela Paxton, who was a very important race where, maybe the lieutenant governor does not get involved because there's so much attention on the race and there's, two candidates that are well-funded, but he did. And so, if you look at the leadership of the lieutenant governor, soundly won his primary, and the people that he supported won and prevailed as well.
One of the things that I've heard some people say is, again, it's too early to handicap the next session of the legislature, but it does seem that when you look at the state Senate and the state House, you may have picked up a few more people that are a little more conservative than they were before. I can use one example just that a lot of people are familiar with because we've had people like Lisa Luby Ryan on this program. And it's rare that an incumbent loses. Jason Villalba did. And that's, I think, somewhat significant in that in many cases you may either in an open seat where you have two individuals running for the first time, or in this case, that seat where you have an incumbent running, some individuals that you might find a little easier to work with come January.
Yeah, look, I mean, we think there are two big winners from last night's election from the space that we sit in, religious liberty and protecting privacy. And we know, I mean, there's a court case at the U.S. Supreme Court right now on religious liberty. We know last session there was a lot of talk on protecting privacy because the federal government and some local governments have tried to punish private businesses for making decisions about their showers, bathrooms, and locker rooms. And when Obama was there, he tried to force public schools to allow boys into girls' bathrooms. And so as a result of that, the state said, whoa, whoa, whoa. We've got to have some type of consistent standard on this issue. So in multi-use facilities, you don't have little girls that are having boys sneak up on them and some of the incidents that we've heard about. Those two issues were heavily in play in this race between Jason Villalba and Lisa Luby Ryan. And why? Because Jason Villalba was one of the most vocal opponents of the Texas Privacy Act, which did not regulate private business. It was about just how we protect privacy in government buildings. And Jason Villalba was one of two Republicans to vote against a religious freedom bill that protects Christian adoption and foster care agencies. That bill was passed and signed into law. Jason Villalba called himself a Republican. He voted against that bill. And Jason Villalba was also heavily supported by Joe Strauss, our outgoing speaker, who we know killed the Texas Privacy Act in the House, and Joe Strauss donated his campaign. So Lisa Luby Ryan, I'm not sure she's ever run for office before. She challenges him, and that is someone that a separate organization that we have, Texas Values Action, endorsed Lisa Luby Ryan against Jason Villalba, and Lisa Luby Ryan won 53-47, a very key race. And you're right, defeating an incumbent, a three-term incumbent, who I think was very, he thought himself very confident about winning this race. And so, but the issues of religious freedom, of privacy were heavily in play in this race. And not only that, but I think it's important for people to know, Kerby, the privacy issue was also on the ballot. There were GOP Republican propositions, if you will, to find out where do Republicans stand on these issues. There were 11 of them. And proposition number 6 was about supporting protecting privacy in bathrooms, shower rooms, and locker rooms in public schools and government buildings, not about what they do on private businesses, respecting private businesses. That proposition won and was victorious, if you will, by over 90%. Okay, almost 1.4 million GOP voters voted in favor of that. That is more votes on propositions total than the repeal Obamacare proposition, just to give you some perspective about how the strength of this issue continues to grow.
Let me just mention, and we might have to keep you over the next segment here, but one of the articles we've posted here is by you, Jonathan. The battle over bathrooms is far from over. And we post it there so that you can, of course, find it at texasvalues.org, but we've also posted on our website, pointofview.net, to read that. Because, Jonathan, just let's talk about that for a minute, since you've already sort of raised the issue. That is an issue that I would suspect even some of our listeners who have a concern about it say, well, we didn't win last time, so this battle is over. You're saying it's far from over. Tell us why.
Yeah, well, it's far from over because folks that want to open up bathrooms to whoever wants to go in based on their own beliefs and how they feel about themselves, they want men to be able to go into women's bathrooms and boys to be able to go into girls' bathrooms and shower rooms and locker rooms. They keep pushing on governments to pass laws and measures that punish private businesses on these issues, that punish nonprofit charities, religious ministries. They want the government telling people what to do on this issue and punishing people if they don't do it their way, which goes against how we've done it in the past. I mean, you've had a boys' room, you've had a girls' room, and if there were concerns, you could use a private facility, which we support that approach. And so those groups and those interests, they keep trying to get the government to do that. And that's what happened during the legislature. There were 2 Democrats that proposed laws that would have fined and criminalized private businesses if they didn't allow men into women's bathrooms and boys into girls' bathrooms and shower rooms and locker rooms. Our effort and others' efforts by the Texas Privacy Act was to say, no, the government should not be telling private businesses what to do. But on our own government property, like public schools and government buildings, we should have consistent standards so people that have a reasonable expectation of privacy don't have men going into women's bathrooms and multi-use facilities. And this is what has happened in public schools. Public schools are passing these measures that allow boys into girls' bathrooms. They're not telling parents. We saw that in Fort Worth ISD. And this is how they're finding out about this issue, Kirby, because we've been dealing with this. A little girl comes home and says, Daddy, there was a boy in my bathroom today. That is unacceptable, and the Texas Privacy Act will solve that problem.
We'll come back and continue our conversation for just a few more minutes with Jonathan. All that coming up right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. The Lansing Housing Commission provides subsidized housing in central Michigan. In many of the facilities, the Housing Commission provides a community room. The commission often grants access to those community rooms for birthday parties, Boy Scout meetings, tutoring sessions, and other community events. However, the commission refused to grant access to the community rooms for religious worship services or programs. His Healing Hands Medical Clinic provides a range of services to the community inside the Housing Commission's facilities. When its leaders asked to use the community room for religious services on Sundays, the church was excluded. The commission explained that it was welcome to use the community room to meet the physical needs of the community, but could not say anything about Jesus or bring any Bibles with them. In court, the commission argued that their policy was permissible because it denied use of the community to all religions equally. But the court rejected that reasoning. Excluding all religions is the very definition of religious discrimination, which is not cured by discriminating against all religions equally. Government commissions are not permitted to pick and choose which viewpoint it will permit in public places and which it will refuse. The First Amendment requires our government to be neutral in dealing with various religious viewpoints that make up our public square. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Jonathan Saenz with us for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Probably get into some of these other issues in the next hour, but if you'd like to join us now, feel free to do so. We were talking about the so-called bathroom bills, and I might mention my commentary today is the summary of the interview we did last week with Ryan Anderson on his new book, When Harry Became Sally. There are about 30 pages of endnotes there, and not only does he address all the transgender issues, but then at the very end, some of the policy issues, since, of course, he's with the Heritage Foundation. But if you'd like to read a very good summary, Jonathan, your piece helps us understand what the Texas Privacy Act would do, helps answer some of the questions and, I think, unfair caricatures about it. puts it in context with some of these so-called SOGI classifications, that sexual orientation and gender identity. It even reminds us what we had with the Houston Equal Rights Ordinance. So it's a very good, easily read summary because, as you point out, the bathroom battle is not over. It's far from being over, isn't it?
Well, you're exactly right, and that's because people that they want the government to punish people like you and I who believe that people should have a reasonable expectation of privacy in multi-use facilities on government property. I mean, you think about a government in a particular city or a county, like the city of Mesquite. We dealt with this issue where they have a swimming pool, where the city runs a swimming pool, and so the city says, oh, we're going to change that rule, and we're going to say that people can use whichever facility they want based on how they feel or how they so-called identify, right? So that male individual says, well, I want to change for the swimming pool in the girls' bathroom. Well, you're not a girl. You're not allowed to do it. Someone pushes back, and this is actually what happened in the city of Seattle. And they say, well, I identify as a girl. There's nothing you can do about it. Now there's a city law in place. There's a city policy in place that gives them government protection to then punish other people. We're going to continue to see people push more of these things, unfortunately. And if we don't do something about the state level, we're going to have more of these problems. And so, and look, the organization that we work with, Texas Values Action, that actually endorses candidates, every candidate in the House that supported the Texas Privacy Act that was endorsed by Texas Values Action, every single one of them won re-election yesterday. And so, and every candidate in the House and Senate that was an incumbent that Texas Values Action endorsed won re-election. And you're talking about an entity that was the leading organization or one of the leading organizations on the privacy issue as well as religious liberty. And so, because we've had the media try to suggest that, oh, well, this, the privacy issues and some of these religious liberty issues are really not that important in these elections. They've been very important, and we can just see that by the way the voters supported Proposition 6, voting 90% in this protecting privacy proposition that was on the GOP ballot, as I mentioned in the previous segment, got almost 1.4 million votes, more votes than even repealing Obamacare. And so, look, if we look at the other race, the Senate race, Bob Hall versus Cindy Burkett, we know Joe Strauss killed the Privacy Act in the House. The former House Speaker, the outgoing House Speaker, he would not allow House members to vote on this issue on the House floor, even though a majority of them supported it. So Joe Strauss was a big supporter or close to Cindy Burkett, and Cindy Burkett lost. She tried to challenge Bob Hall in the Senate race, and she was defeated. That was 53-47. And we know Bob Hall, he filed a bill that relates to the privacy issue. He's been a faith and family champion and been someone that's been very active on this issue. And so, and let's talk about Joe Strauss's seat that he's vacating, the Speaker of the House that killed the Privacy Act. The seat that he vacated, the top vote getter in that seat is Matt Beebe, who was endorsed by Texas Values Action, is very strong on the privacy issue and other religious liberty issues. And so the other individual that was a part of killing the Privacy Act, Byron Cook, his seat was vacated by him, and Thomas McNutt is in that race. That seat's going to a runoff, and Thomas McNutt's going to be a part of that runoff, and he's been very supportive of the protecting privacy and religious liberty. So we're going to continue to see these issues be important to voters.
One more issue that you sort of already raised, and that is Joe Strauss. He is no longer the Speaker of the House in the future. And one of the things we've noticed over the years, Jonathan, when we talk nationally, we see good legislation in the House of Representatives that goes to the Senate to die. Well, in the Texas legislature, it's just the opposite. We see good legislation in the Senate that goes to the House to die. I don't want to lay all of it at the feet of Joe Strauss, although I'm tempted, but certainly say that could change dramatically, don't you think, in this next legislative session?
Well, there are at least 6 races that are going to a runoff. And so, look, while the Texas primary for Republicans and Democrats was yesterday, there are some very key races in the House that are going to a runoff that we're going to see a lot of attention,
yes,
in the next month or so. And that'll tell us where things end up. But the trend so far is that a rejection of the policies of Joe Strauss and an embrace and people understanding how much of an impact the Speaker can have when he stifles and individually kills legislation and doesn't let House members vote their district and vote their conscience on a lot of these issues. And so And look, Joe Strauss went way out there on a limb and was very public. In the past, we've known him to be in opposition of religious freedom bills, of some certain pro-life issues. And so when he was even more public about his opposition to the Privacy Act, that was kind of a new space for him to get into. But for many of us, it's something we knew all along. And I think it helped a lot of people see it. That's why his own party, his Senate Republican Executive Committee, the people that are elected as Republicans to message on Republican issues, they themselves, 2/3 of them, voted to censure Joe Strauss because he's gone away from supporting policies of the Republican Party on life, on religious liberty, on property tax reform, on a whole host of things, border security, and then, of course, the privacy issue, so many things that the governor and lieutenant governor stand aligned with, that Joe Strauss was really out of the Republican GOP platform circling. And so you saw that play out at the ballot, too, where a number of election results were related to whether or not they were supporters of Joe Strauss or not. And that's something a group called the Texas Freedom Caucus is certainly celebrating last night, and I'm sure a little bit today as well.
Well, again, one of the things that's exciting is now that we have a local station in addition to the national broadcast we'll do the next 2 hours, it allows us to focus a little bit of time and attention on the Texas legislature. So, Jonathan, I have not really been able to call on you in the past because if we talk about what's happened in Texas, the people and listeners in 41 other states go, well, that's really not relating to what's happening in my state. But now that we have one that's local, I anticipate calling on you a lot more often. And if nothing else, I hope that this encouraged those of you listening to find out a little bit more about Texas values. We also have posted his piece today on the bathroom bill and what might happen in the next legislature. So, Jonathan, it's always a delight to chat with you, and I look forward to the next opportunity.
Well, I do, too. And look, last night's election proves that, by and large, candidates and voters who stand by Texas values win.
And that is certainly a great theme to end this hour. And so, again, Jonathan, thank you for joining us. Go again to our website, pointofview.net, and you can find out more about Texas values, or just go to txvalues.org. There's a place for you to get an update. And, of course, they have the voter's guide for the primary season. You'll want to get one for the general election. And we need to take a break. But when we come back, I'm going to talk a little bit about this action by the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, actually filing a lawsuit against California. That also relates to a commentary I have coming out about the Oakland mayor who warned individuals in the immigrant community that ICE agents were coming. So we'll get into that. We're going to spend some time talking about the whole issue of Second Amendment, and in particular some of the pieces that we've posted that relate to why this gun control issue probably isn't going anywhere. And then we'll spend some time talking about the tariffs that are being proposed by President Donald Trump. Second hour today, we'll or the third hour actually today, we'll be getting into our conversation about millennials and pro-life issues in particular. We will have our Millennial Roundtable. So we have a lot more to cover. 1 hour down, 2 to go, and we'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.